this moment to the noon time, the afternoon. Tsohoraim in Hebrew. And glad to be connected to you, however it is we're connected, whether it's by, you're watching live, or you'll watch the video, or you're watching the video later, or both. Maybe there's both, and I'm sure there's lots of neither. But I'm glad to be here. I don't see comments, so I'm wondering if I'm streaming. I'm gonna really quickly make a quick text. Not that I'm not saying that there's no one's commenting. I'm saying there's no box for comments. So that makes me wonder if if I'm actually on Facebook. So if you're trying to comment to reassure me, I'm not sure that'll work because they're not there. So sorry for the silence. I will get going in just a second, regardless of whether I'm on or not, because I assume it'll live at some point. So this is part of the deal here. I heard CBS went totally blank at one point. I'm actually checking my phone to see if it looks like anything's happening. Oh, look. No, I just went blank. Randy says I am. So I guess I just don't see what I normally see on the right-hand side. And that's fine. So if you got nothing to say, maybe it only kicks in if someone has something to say. So if you're out there, try commenting. But I have a feeling it's not going to make a difference. So I'll just start and give it up to the universe. Anyway, okay. So I did get a comment on my phone that I'm on Facebook, but I generally see this is like so inside baseball, but I'm just gonna go with it. We're all friends, and if we weren't all friends before this started, let's just be friends. And I can just say that generally to the right of me on my screen, I can see the chat happening. And I can't see it. So that's what unnerved me, although I certainly use that term. That's an overstatement. I'm not unnerved. I still have my nerves. And if it's, there's no worst case scenario here, to be honest. This is welcome to From the Left Wing. Maybe I'm a little unnerved, but just a little. From the Left Wing, this is episode number 10. I keep doing that wrong. I have to use it's counterintuitive. It's a mirror. Number 10. And you can see the title. I'll get to that in a second. Again, I've been broadcasting. Somebody can let me know if there's a better kind of more hip, updated term to use when you are live streaming from video, other than broadcasting. But it just kind of rolls off my tongue. I'm a 20th century person at heart, kind of living here in the 21st century, for better and for worse. But I've been broadcasting since before Passover, back in early April, every Tuesday and Thursday at noon, minus two Thursdays, one because it was actually Passover and one because I had to officiate a funeral. But other than that, Tuesdays and Thursdays at noon, reading for whoever is out there watching and caring, a 10-year-old or so column, or essays from a 10-year-old so column that I used to have on the Jewish Federation website. They had asked a number of rabbis of different denominations and different points of view. It was really actually a very lovely idea to write a monthly column. And they had all these different rabbinic sort of voices, St. Louis rabbinic voices, kind of speaking on whatever they want to speak out on or write out on. So I did that for 2 or 3 years, somewhere like that, 2.5 years, and then they sort of discontinued that initiative, and I was left with my columns. They eventually were taken down, all of them, all the Rabbi's columns. They don't really live on the internet anymore. They took them off their web page. They probably revamped it or something. And I largely forgot about From the Left Wing until the pandemic occurred, and I went to the synagogue to sort of bring things from my synagogue office to create this home office that is here. That I've sort of taken over. This isn't our den, but it's sort of an adjunct to the den. So I've sort of taken it over. And I don't know, maybe this is sort of, there's there's files on the floor. Maybe you can see like all kinds of books and files on the floor. My wife also is working from home, and her office is the dining room. I imagine this is very similar to many households out there where people are fortunate enough to work from home during the quarantine. I always want to put my heart out and my respect out, my love out to those people who can't work at home, who need to go to their places of work. But my wife and I have been fortunate enough to work from home these past 2 months now, more than 2 months. And so I went to the CRC office. I go once a week or so. But that first time I remember just trying to grab whatever I could that would be sort of helpful, knowing that I would be working from home. In my head, did not think it would be 2 months. I have to be honest with you. I know that there are some people out there that are were very prescient about this and kind of sort of knew that this was going to be a long haul. I don't know what I am. I guess I'm an optimist, or I wasn't thinking like that. I was thinking, a few weeks. I don't know. But anyway, I grabbed a bunch of stuff in order to work from home, and sort of dawned on me in that very moment of being at my office that I wanted to, that I thought about the left wing column, and I said, wow, I wonder if that would be something. We're looking for ways to connect to people. Obviously, CRC members, we're broadcasting out to the Central Reformed Congregation Facebook page and our YouTube channel. So we certainly want to connect, to our community when everybody is sheltered in place and can't come to the synagogue, and trying to look for different ways to connect to each other, but also because it's the internet, to whoever happens to find us on the Facebook page. So I grabbed the columns, I printed off all of them that I could find. I think that's all of them, and decided to do this. And so here I am, all these weeks later. I guess 10 episodes later, and I'm reading my columns and talking about them a little bit, and generally answering questions and addressing comments, but they're not there right now. Something we'll have to figure out why. But I'm going to do it again, and I have been most episodes. I have like a sort of an outline that I wrote about what do I mean by left wing, and again, this is the left-right spectrum, which is almost always used. Well, it's usually used in the political arena, left and right. I'm applying those same sort of designations to the religious spectrum, and that's certainly used. You've heard of right-wing religion and left-wing religion, and so that's what I'm talking about, is left and right on the religious spectrum, though this column it approaches being political, but not partisan politics, issue politics, but maybe not. I'll let you all be the judge of that. So I've been talking about left and right, very broadly when it comes to religious traditions, and in the case of Judaism, Jewish traditions and Jewish law and Jewish rituals, that as you get further to the left, and again, remembering it's a spectrum, so there's lots of space in between for, beyond the edges, the left and the right, but as you get towards the left, there's more of an openness when it comes to religious traditions, openness to change them, or to exclude some, or to add others. an openness when it comes to interaction and conversation and cooperation, even acceptance of other faiths, other religions, other traditions. And as you go to the right, the opposite, obviously, a less openness when it comes to changing or adding or subtracting from religious traditions, and a little bit and more guardedness as you go to the right with interfaith programming and other interfaith activities. So I had two things, ways to talk about left and right before I read the column that I haven't yet brought into the conversation. The first one is Rabbi Mordechai Kaplan, who was a conservative rabbi until he sort of branched off and started a new denomination called Reconstructionist Judaism, which I think is a fairly familiar term to people who are involved Jewishly. It's a small denomination, though they have their own rabbinical school and their own union of congregations and their summer camps. So it's small compared to the larger three denominations: Orthodox, Conservative, and Reform. But it's sort of the fourth major stream. I want to be respectful. I have a dear friend who is studying to be a Reconstructionist rabbi, and I have great love and respect for the Reconstructionist movement. I mean, in terms of trying to talk about how large it is, but it's certainly it's very influential, even beyond its size. Let's just say that. So Mordechai Kaplan was known as the founder. He was the founder of Reconstructionist Judaism. Interesting fact. Side note, his daughter was the first bat mitzvah, first young woman to become bat mitzvah, when all of those years it had been just boys becoming bar mitzvah. Definitely a lot to say about Reconstructionist Judaism and its where it fits on in American Judaism. But suffice to say that it is towards the left. Tries to occupy a space maybe between Reform and Conservative, but that's simplistic, but at least it's maybe helpful. Anyway, Mordechai Kaplan used to say this about Jewish tradition and Jewish law. He said, Jewish tradition / Jewish law should always have a vote, but never a veto. And I always thought that was a great framework for this left-right conversation. So he's saying that in the left, and the left side of the spectrum for Judaism, for those Jews who, and again, the spectrum, by the way, doesn't include, in my mind, people who are Jewish perhaps, but who have Judaism plays no role in their life whatsoever. That they're secular, and that goes for anybody, if they were, born Christian or Muslim, but they totally opt out almost entirely out of religious life, by any definition, that doesn't mean that not even, but if folks who don't believe in God, who consider themselves atheists, might be on the spectrum because they participate in Jewish life for, in whatever way makes them comfortable. There's humanistic Judaism, which, allows for, certainly, and maybe even encourages, Judaism beyond theistic belief. But anyway, I'm talking about people sort of off of that chart altogether. There's a role certainly in society for totally secular people, an important role, but they're not on the spectrum of left and right. So he's saying, Mordechai Kaplan, by saying should have a vote but not a veto, that those of us that are on the spectrum, even at the very left of the spectrum, should always consider what Jewish tradition is or Jewish law is in any given subject, and kind of consider it in deciding whether to include it or change it or drop it. Consider it, but don't let that stop you from changing, dropping, including, right? Because the tradition shouldn't have a veto. There's other factors. There's modern sensibility. There is ethical concerns. Is the ritual or law or tradition ethical by modern contemporary standards? Things like that. So let the tradition be a guide, but don't let it sort of rule over you. against all other considerations. And I would say on the left of the spectrum, we do that. We, as I certainly include myself, I am from the left wing, proudly. We do the vote not veto thing. And as you get to the right, I would probably say that it's more veto over vote. Or no, always a vote. I'm sorry. They would always vote for the tradition and rarely, if ever, veto. So I guess religious tradition should have a vote, but not a veto. And then the last thing I'll say is that the Reform movement, one of the Jewish Reform movement, one of the sort of taglines when it comes to this sort of stream of thought is informed choice. I thought that's a good term to put into this mix. That and it's similar to Kaplan. The idea is you should inform yourself. You should learn. You should study the various Jewish traditions and rituals and laws, and then include that in the choice you're making, whether to do that tradition or drop that tradition or change that tradition. Again, informed choice much more on the left end of the spectrum. On the right end of the spectrum, it's informed without much choice. So there you have it. There's some new formulations. So, going to get to the column for the day. I want to say that I've got about maybe all the way through June worth of columns. As I look through them, some of them, maybe 2 or 3 in the pile, are tied to Jewish holy days or observances. Probably the time I was writing the column, something was coming up on the calendar and I wrote connected to it. And obviously, I'm not going to be able to always match that because I did a Passover. I did read a Passover column during Passover, but that's going to be few and far between. So there are going to be a few here. I got one on the 4th of July coming up, which obviously is American Jews observe 4th of July, but it's obviously well beyond American Jews, but Americans. But I did write a column about that, and I'll read that. Obviously, it won't be July 4th, although probably close. There's a Hanukkah one. Certainly will be well out of season for Hanukkah. And this one is about Tisha B'Av, or at least it uses Tisha B'Av as a jumping off point. Tisha B'Av, I think that I explained it in the column, but I just wanted to sort of put that out there that this is one of those that is going to feel a little bit out of time in terms of the framing, because it's about an observance that is a few months away, usually August, sometimes late July. I'm going to read it. It's called Jewish Gentrification. Actually, I guess on the column it was called Warning Jewish Gentrification. So add the word warning to that. And here we go. The summer fast day, Tisha B'Av, was set aside as a time of mourning, especially for the destruction by foreign enemies of the temple that once stood in Jerusalem. The prophets of the Hebrew Bible paint a picture of the Judean kingdom of that day as splintered, and a society in which the wealthy had forgotten their obligations to the poor. The community wasn't taking care of one another. Too many individuals and families were left behind, and therefore the sages decided that one of the lessons of Tisha B'Av is that it is possible for a community to so weaken themselves internally that they become especially vulnerable to attack from the outside. This is why the Talmudic phrase Kol Yisrael Averim Ze Bezeh, which means all Jews are responsible for one another, is repeated so often during the season of Tisha B'Av. As a universalist, parenthetically, that was the first, well, actually right down there, the first column that I read and wrote, Jewish Universalism, so I consider myself a universalist. I believe that all human beings are responsible for one another, but for Tisha B'Av, I will focus on the Jewish world. Historically, there does seem to have been a true good faith effort to achieve this goal of communal responsibility. Jewish law, developed in the aftermath of the trauma of the destruction of the temple, emphasized mutual dependency. We gleaned from the codes, the Jewish law codes, a Jewish society where people of widely different economic circumstance lived side by side and those who were fortunate, and those who were fortunate did everything they could to help and support those who were unsuccessful or who had fallen on hard times. There was a collective tzedakah collection that made sure everyone was being taken care of. The Jewish laws of charity often quoted the Torah principle that any wealth held by a person or family was only loaned to them by God, and therefore their good fortune came with an obligation for it to be shared. Flash forward many centuries to St. Louis. If you spend any time here, you will be told about the Council House. In the 1930s and 1940s, it was founded by social workers in the Jewish community to serve the needs of poor children. They ran a program of clubs, nursery schools, day camps, physical education, counseling, clubs, and classes. Many people I know give much credit to this organization for exposing them to activities, experiences, and ideas that lifted them up from difficult economic circumstances. In many laudable ways, our contemporary Jewish community has carried on this tradition. Think about the communal institutions that exist to help the under-resourced in our midst. The Jewish Food Pantry and the Jewish Family and Children's Services come immediately to mind. However, I am moved by the coming fast day of Tisha B'Av to interject a note of caution. It is a mirror of the larger societal problem of gentrification, which I define as paying attention to the desires of upscale and wealthy people at the expense of the needs of poorer folks. We are blessed to have many people in our Jewish community who are quite comfortable financially. However, 15% of local Jewish households are said to be low income, with others struggling at or just below middle class status. The current economic downturn has surely increased these numbers. I wonder and worry about this vulnerable group. With our nursing homes, synagogues, camps, and community centers so seemingly focused on serving the affluent, are we in danger of ignoring those who are on the financial margins? As neighborhoods become more and more segregated by economics, we no longer see the problems of poverty on a day-to-day basis, and it becomes far too easy to get lost in the details of our own lives and forget others in the bigger picture. We need to make sure that the generosity that is truly prevalent among us is wisely distributed. Are we certain, for example, that even the scholarships we offer are substantial enough to actually help the very people they were designed for? Let the lessons of Tisha B'Av tweak our consciences and allow us to redouble our efforts to not leave anybody behind. This is how we will remain strong, internally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually, which will leave us better able to face the challenges that inevitably come at us from the outside. And that's the column. I hope it was heard out there. At the very least, it'll be a video. Few things to say in the absence of seeing the chat. One is that it was pretty jarring to read about the financial downturn, which was 10 years ago. I think 2008. Anyway, the current economic downturn. So I said the column was about 10 years ago, so 2010. So still the ramifications of that economic downturn, which obviously we're now facing one because of the pandemic, even bigger. So all the more reason to pay attention that we don't gentrify, that we make sure that we are taking care of each other, and that those who are more affluent can help with those who are not as fortunate, which has always been a principle in our Judaism. That's why I'm comfortable in saying that while this, I guess, touches on politics, it doesn't seem to be political, right? I think on the left politically and the right politically, there is a concern about well, anyways, I won't say much about the politics, but it felt at the time that I guess maybe the reason this counts in the left-right religious spectrum is that it takes an ancient observance like Tisha B'Av and the fact that the scriptures and the commentators all say that in even harder terms than I said that the society was weakened among other things, according to the prophets, by the widening gap, the wealth gap, and I guess the income gap when it comes to mostly people who worked in agriculture, and that weakened the society and made them vulnerable to the Babylonians, who eventually attacked and exiled most of the folks in Judea. So anyway, but then it takes that sort of ancient story and applies it to today. Something to pay attention to, and maybe even more so now when there's so much suffering and so much loss and so much economic calamity, as we try to, minimize the illnesses and deaths because of COVID. That was the main thing I wanted to say. Is actually one more thing. I do remember the impetus for writing this column. Besides Tisha B'Av, I was with a group called Jews United for Justice, and at the time there was a Jewish Center for the Aged, which made it a very hard decision to reduce the number of Medicaid beds reserved for people that were low income. Their financial reality, they said, may force that. And there was a big outcry from the Jewish community, and actually the Jewish Center for the Aged reversed that decision and brought back a good number of those Medicaid beds that they said they were going to drop. And that, obviously, prompted me to think about this idea of gentrification. And, ironically or ultimately, unfortunately, the Jewish Center for the Aged doesn't really exist anymore. There's now a nursing home that kind of bought it. It still has Jewish, still has a kosher dining room and there's services. But the Jewish community no longer has a big say in, how much is reserved for Medicaid, for low-income people. And so that nursing home became gentrified, So obviously it's a societal issue, and because it's a societal issue and Jews are part of society, it's an issue in our own Jewish community. So there you have it, Jewish gentrification, almost 12:30. Little preview what's coming up. Why not? Next week, columns on tolerance, and a kind of a cute one about my musical taste and sort of stereotypes about people who are rabbis or clergy. And then the first week of June, I've got two summary, not SUMMERY, columns. One about nature and one about summer camp, which I've been teasing because it was, I think, for sure the most controversial of these columns about Jewish summer camp versus secular summer camp, and got a lot of response out of that one. So that'll be coming the first week of June. And then later on, there's one about Martin Luther King and Abraham Heschel, about a relationship with the African Hebrew Israelites. And then there's a very political one, I think, about blue states and red states. You'll see in a few weeks. The 4th of July, I reference. Hanukkah, I reference. So all of those are coming up. I think will be good pretty much through the end of June, and then I'll sign off from the left wing. But we got a good month and a half before that happens. So I haven't done this for a while, but from the left wing, this is Rabbi Randy. Thank you for joining me. And this coming Tuesday at noon, I'll be back with another From the Left Wing column. Take care, everybody. Thinking about you, wishing you well, and those you love, and still trying to put my arms around the whole world, because there's a lot to do and a lot to care about. Lots of disappointments and suffering and illness. So in the midst of it all, I hope that all of us are blessed with some good and holy and sweet moments as well, because life certainly, as we've learned, offers us curses sometimes, but also many, many, many blessings. So that's all for now. Have a good rest of the afternoon, and a good rest of the day, and a good Shabbat if you observe Shabbat, and Memorial Day weekend. Shalom.